morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here with us today at SCB 10X DeFi and Web3 Virtual Summit, Redefine Tomorrow 2023 that we are doing with Bloomberg this year. I'm Tai Panich, CEO and CIO of SCB 10X, and with me today, we are honored to have Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, with us in the Fireside Chat, a crypto-enabled future start with infrastructure. Thank you so much, Brad, for being here with us.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me and including me.
All right, so let's start. I doubt if there are people in the audience who don't know Brad Garlinghouse or Ripple, but anyway, let's have you introduce yourself, give brief overview about Ripple, and what are the main problems in traditional finance that Ripple is trying to solve.
Excellent. I appreciate that introduction. So, as Ty introduced, my name is Brad Garlinghouse. I'm the CEO at Ripple. I've been at Ripple for over 8 years now and seen a lot of evolutions in the crypto markets and certainly at Ripple. And the core of what Ripple has been focused on from the earliest days is really how do we use these software technologies, these blockchain technologies at the core, and we're using them to solve pain points around how banks and financial institutions move money around the world. And it's specifically by tackling that underlying infrastructure. Now, many people ask, well, I want to use Ripple directly, and we don't onboard consumers or businesses directly today. The first vertical we've really focused on are the financial institutions that are enabling these cross-border payments. As I'm sure this audience probably knows well, it's a very large market, measured over $100 trillion of cross-border transactions. Now, we are expanding, as I'm sure we'll talk about today, into other use cases around liquidity and custody and even tokenization, kind of leading there is around CBDCs. But again, our customers today are mostly financial institutions, some corporates. And what I think I'll maybe finish and then pass it back to you is the vast majority of our business is actually outside of the United States. About 95% of our customers are non-US, and that's really where we've seen a lot of growth the last few years.
Okay, so Brad, as suggested in the topic, a crypto-enabled future starts with infrastructure. What kind of infrastructure, maybe if you could go into detail that you think are important for the future of crypto, and how does Ripple fit into that picture?
So look, I think one of the things that happens when people get excited about a new technology is kind of the hype cycle goes through these waves and people are exploring what are the use cases. Well, for me, I think for crypto to really become integrated into our financial system, you really have to address that infrastructure I was talking about earlier. You need to have liquidity and the kind of on and off ramps. The custody is something I mentioned earlier. And the other one we haven't talked about yet, but certainly because we serve financial institutions, is around compliance. If you don't have these components, you're just kind of playing with things. And I think at the core, you really have to, in order to integrate with the existing financial systems, you have to have those components in order to address any of those any fundamental pain points there. So I think one of the things that's served Ripple really well over the years is we've, I think, consistently been focused on what is the problem we're trying to solve, who is our customer, and tackle the inefficiencies of that. And for us, as we talked about a moment ago, it started, what we're best known for is around this something called RippleNet, and it's really around this cross-border payment. And as I mentioned, we've expanded beyond that into things like tokenization and most recently a custody business. But look, I think we've remained focused from day one on utility and solving real problems for our customers. And there's one thing I would leave any audience with is for crypto to really thrive in the future, it's going to have to make sure it's always focused on what problem are we solving.
Yeah, so Brad, you mentioned about crypto custody that it's a key piece of infrastructure. So recently, last week, you announced the acquisition of Medico, which is a crypto custody in Switzerland that focuses on serving banks. So kind of curious, what's the reason behind the acquisition, and why can you just partner? Why is the need to acquire, and how does this acquisition fit in the overall Ripple strategy?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that has been helpful for Ripple is we've always taken a very long view about where the world's going and been patient about, building today, but thinking about where the world's going to be in the future. And one of the things that I very much believe, and you're seeing more major players, the CEO of BlackRock recently was talking about how much of traditional assets would be tokenized. Well, as you talk about literally trillions of dollars being tokenized, maybe it's through CBDCs, maybe it's real estate tokenization, maybe it's the existingly defined crypto market. You have to have robust custody solutions. And today, many financial institutions are looking to other technology providers to provide those solutions. I'm incredibly excited about the Medico acquisition and kind of integrating them to Team Ripple, because it really is putting Ripple as the leading enterprise solutions company for this space. I think we and Medico have a long history of working with financial institutions. We've had tier 1, tier 2, and even smaller payment providers. Medico's customer base includes the likes of BBVA and Citi and BNP Paribas. So I think with Ripple's even customers like SCB, together we think it really is the winning hand to solve a portfolio of problems and make sure we're really delivering for the customer.
Mm-hmm. I see. So let's step back and talk about Ripple's bread and butter business, cross-border payment. And could you tell us about Ripple's cross-border payment solution, RippleNet? There are the fiat-enabled one and also XRP-enabled one, which is called on-demand liquidity or ODL. What are the key features or advantages of those solutions that set them apart from other cross-border payment alternatives in the market currently?
Well, Tai, as you said, I think RippleNet really is the payments network that we're best known for. And the idea there was to offer a single API to plug into an end-to-end network that's today is live in more than 55 countries, hundreds of FIs around the world. And we've always kind of espoused this idea of an internet of value. And the question is, how do you start enabling this internet of value? And RippleNet really is that underpinning. Within RippleNet, there's a service, as you asked, called ODL, or on-demand liquidity. And this is the part of RippleNet that uses XRP as a bridge currency to instantly settle transactions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. About a little over half of our transactions on RippleNet are through ODL. And ODL really has exploded over the last couple of years. And I mean, one thing that's worth noting, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, the explosion has happened in the face of really the United States being a frozen market. And all of that growth really has been outside of the United States. For us, RippleNet and ODL were really the first enterprise crypto offering to institutions. And we think many others have seen, hey, if you can package these technologies in a way that's solving a real problem, people will lean in. It's only when it's just speculation or it's not clear what problem it's solving that I think companies have run into some trouble.
Actually, I wanted to ask that question about ODL, which use XRP as a bridge currency for transfer payment between sender and receiver. Who are the customer that prefer to use ODL for remittance today? And the fact that, like you kind of touched on it a little bit, that Ripple is right now having the litigation with SEC, whether XRP is an unregistered security or not, whether that has impact on the growth of ODL.
Right. So the customers are using ODL today. They run from the largest big FIs to smaller payment providers and money transmitters, and even in some situations, corporates. The majority of customers tend to be nimble, tech forward, willing to take risk. And the remittance market in particular, as you probably know, has they charge a lot, and sometimes it's not even a great service. We've highlighted customers like Travelex. Trenglo is a partner of ours in Southeast Asia. In the Middle East, we work with a company called People. And a lot of RippleNet volume is serving not just remittance, but also treasury and kind of small and medium enterprise payment use cases. So we've been successful in that. I don't think you want to just take one size fits all for the customers. You want to think broadly and make sure you're responding to the feedback. But look, we've processed over $30 billion of transactions, and that has continued to accelerate despite some of these headwinds. Now, as you just started to ask there, I think the question about the SEC and what is XRP, I think, is an important one. And it's outside the United States. I mean, one kind of humorous, almost ironic reality is that the only country on the planet that thinks XRP might be a security is the United States. There's lots of clarity in other jurisdictions around the world. And so that's where you're seeing the growth. And if you don't have that clarity, if you don't have that certainty, that makes it hard for entrepreneurs and investors to lean into that market. And so I think you do see people kind of pause and wait and see what's going to happen.
I think I listened in your other interviews that you talk about more than 50% of the transaction volume nowadays at Ripple is coming from ODL. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Oh, that's amazing. And how do you see the competition between using XRP via ODL versus using stablecoin or cross-border payment?
I think is a really important question. I think it's often misunderstood. I absolutely view stablecoins as a complement and even an accelerant to what Ripple's doing at its core. And I think you have to start with a clear understanding. Stablecoins address a single currency. So if you're just doing a domestic use case, stablecoins can be a great solution. If you're going cross-border, having a bridge currency versus a stablecoin has some advantages. So I'll highlight a couple. One, there are liquidity advantages, and we have spent years developing partnerships with liquidity providers, market makers, making sure there's good liquidity between XRP and fiat around the world. Now, if you're a major currency, even if you're a US dollar stablecoin, you still have lots of small currencies that you may want to get into around the world. And we've really built that single API to enable that, so you can plug in and go anywhere. Now, another thing to think about here is the stability. So, customers, when you're using an XRP solution, you're holding XRP for really maybe 4 or 5 seconds. And this is obviously enables us to make sure it's a very low, the volatility risk is very low. If you were using a stable coin and you have transactions that might take days, they haven't always held their peg, and that creates some risk. So I actually am excited by what's been going on in the stablecoin market. And as you may know, Ripple is playing in that market to some degree with the work we're doing with central banks. And I think that actually helps from a regulatory advantage, even that you always know that if you're going through RippleNet and you're going through ODL, you always know that's through a regulated financial institutions. And so the concerns around AML and KYC aren't there.
Yeah, you touched about CBDC, so let's talk about that. So last week is actually your very, very busy week because you launched this CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency platform. You acquired a company. I'm not sure whether this week we can wait to hear something else coming out from Ripple or not. But yeah, could you please talk a little bit about your CBDC platform, which allow these government, central banks, and financial institutions to issue and operate their own CBDC and digital currency? Yeah? What is Ripple role in this part of infrastructure?
Yep. So the CBDC platform, which we announced last week, and I agree, it was a busier week than we even anticipated, but it really is allowing a central bank an end-to-end solution so they can issue a tokenized version really of their currency. And I mean, they could use other kind of asset classes if you wanted to, but for us, we view a central bank kind of similar to a big commercial bank. We know how to work and sell into those banks. And so what we built was effectively a private instance of the XRP ledger that they can issue a CBDC on top of. So some central banks are experimenting. Some already have live transactions. I think we've publicly spoken about 4 different central banks we're working with around the world. We have the Royal Monetary Authority of Bhutan, the Republic of Palau. Then we announced a partnership with the Central Bank of Montenegro. Then, as you mentioned just last week, a partnership with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. So I think these all are interesting, and I think it's going to be exciting to see where it goes. And it kind of depends upon how different countries lean into it. I will say before I leave this topic, I think it's always important to start with what I was describing earlier. What problem are we solving? And I think the CBDC efforts that will be most successful are those that have the most clarity of what problem they're trying to solve.
I see. Got it. Okay. Yeah, actually curious too about your working with HKMA that on real estate tokenization, right? So using the same platform on CBDC platform, you can also do real estate tokenization and asset tokenization, yes?
Well, that's the idea. And again, one of the advantages
Mm.
of working with Ripple is the XRP ledger, which is kind of a core part of our technology. You don't have to just use it for one use case. And we are seeing,
Mhm.
things that Ripple isn't even necessarily doing, but we're seeing people use the XRP ledger around real estate. There's a real estate registry being built in the country of Colombia. So there's a bunch of different use cases, but at the core, having the liquidity and getting into and out of XRP for that bridge, because even if you're issuing a central bank digital currency on the XRP ledger, that enables it, not necessarily that it starts there, but it enables the opportunity to go into and out of XRP more seamlessly to settle with other currencies around the world.
Okay. How about your thought about CBDC for cross-border payment? Because some people believe that CBDC has a chance to be more successful in cross-border payment than stablecoin. So curious about your opinion on CBDC versus stablecoin versus XRP via ODL.
Yeah. Well, as I was saying earlier, I really think stablecoins are a complement to what we're doing.
Mhm.
In fact, there might be instances where we would use stablecoins within RippleNet for certain use cases. Again, because stablecoins are addressing a single domestic currency, it doesn't solve that cross currency problem. And
Mhm.
as we talked about earlier, there's over $100 trillion going cross currency and cross border, where you need something to settle the transaction between. Just because you're using a stable coin, if you're a US dollar trying to go into euro or a Thai baht, you still need something to solve that problem, unless you're going to have people accept US dollars or Thai baht in every country. So we have always felt that the use of stable coins and making domestic payment systems more efficient is actually an accelerant to what we're doing, and that's a good thing. If you have a more successful and more liquid domestic setup, the expectation and demand for a more liquid and more seamless cross-border payment system even becomes higher.
Mm. Mhm, mhm. Got it. Okay. Yeah, curious, in your opinion, what should be the role of blockchain in cross-border payment and remittance for the future of crypto to be very successful? We have talked about this CBDC, stablecoin, XRP. What really need more in cross-border payment and remittance? Let's say 5 years from now, what do you want to see?
Well, I mean, it won't surprise you, I don't think, or many people watching. The number one thing I think about is just that regulatory clarity, the certainty. There's confusion in some markets about how this will be regulated. And so what happens is you have banks that are nervous about leaning in to take advantage of these technologies. And we're now at a point where we have proven that these technologies can scale. They can be more efficient than existing rails in lots of ways. And so what I think is a primary inhibitor to some of the banks we work with is really that lack of regulatory clarity. With that, I think people would be more comfortable and feel like, okay, great, it's time to lean in. But we haven't gotten there yet in some markets. But I think it's worth highlighting. You're seeing major economies, and look, Thailand would be one market that I think is done some of the work to make sure there's some of that clarity. Certainly, you've seen that in Europe just recently passed something called MiCA. Maybe it's pronounced Micah, I'm not sure. But the UAE has leaned in here, the UK, Japan. And so I think you're seeing a globally momentum in a very positive way, where the US, I think, is falling behind. And that's reflected in where the companies are being started, where are entrepreneurs going. They're not starting them in the United States right now.
So Brad, going back to the key piece of infrastructure that you talked about before, right? You talk about liquidity, you talk about crypto custody, then compliance, and I think tokenization. So how about compliance? Is there anything that Ripple is doing right now on compliance side?
It's a really important question. Right now, Ripple only works with regulated endpoints. So the compliance, and frankly, when I meet with regulators around the world and I explain to them how RippleNet works and how any KYC check, any AML check, any kind of regulatory check is enforced at the endpoint. And because we're only working with regulated endpoints, regulators very quickly get comfortable with the fact that you can't really enable anonymous transactions through RippleNet because of that point. Now, you're bringing up, I think, an interesting point. I mentioned it earlier that I think there's some foundational pieces that are possible to really help crypto succeed in the years to come. And I think robust compliance capabilities is important. There's interesting startups trying to solve that from an identity point of view, building verified identity that can be a token that kind of represents that. Ripple is not working on that directly. There's some people doing things around the XRP ledger around that, but it's not something that Ripple's working on today. But suffice it to say, I do think compliance, and frankly, I'm a big fan of Chainalysis, the previous presenter, the CEO there, Michael Groniger. And they're an example of a company that has a clear customer. They have focused on that customer. They built out a great business focused on that piece. And I think that company and Michael are good for the whole crypto industry to be successful.
All right. I have to ask the next question. I think it's the most anticipated question for the entire session. Can you provide the update status about the SEC court case? Maybe if you could dial back a little bit and give a brief story about this SEC litigation that's going on versus Ripple, and maybe talk a bit about how this lawsuit impacted Ripple's operation and partnership in the US versus globally. Yep. And can we expect the resolution very soon about this court case, or at least by the end of this year?
Yeah. So as you asked, I'll kind of zoom back. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission first sued Ripple in December of 2020. It was actually December 22nd, right before Christmas. The chairman of the SEC at the time actually left the position. He resigned from the position the next day. And when that first happened, one of the things I said very publicly is that I viewed this not just as an attack on Ripple, but really the entire crypto industry. And we had been advocating for clarity for crypto in the United States for years. And I think what people have come to find is, in fact, we were right. 2 years later, I think just about everyone believes and understands that what this attack from the US SEC is about much more than just Ripple. And in fact, it's about the whole industry. And the ability for Ripple to kind of prevail will have a big impact on crypto broadly. So I think many people have come around to that understanding. Now, in terms of where things stand today, and I'll try to not get too much into the legal weeds. You are right that I feel very confident that we'll see a decision from the courts in this year. In fact, I think I would guess it'll be in weeks, not months. There's some decisions that happened last week that you may have read about, that the judge ruled against the SEC's effort to redact certain information about a very kind of infamous speech that the then director of corporate finance, a guy named Bill Hinman, gave, talking about why ETH, in his view, was not a security. And the court just ruled last week that the notes and emails associated with that are going to be made public and should be public around June 13th. So I think that's a huge win for transparency. But what really calls out is there hasn't been clarity. And despite calls and demands from leaders across the crypto industry, we haven't seen that yet. But as I said, Ripple decided to lean in and fight this fight, both for Ripple, but for the whole industry. We've spent a lot of money defending it. And I think what we've called out is really that the government in the United States and the SEC particularly is putting politics ahead of smart policy. And because of that, you're seeing entrepreneurs go overseas. You're seeing companies like Ripple. Most of our hiring is non-US now. Most of our customers, as I mentioned, are non-US. And so I think it's kind of to be expected that's what would happen if you have a negative, kind of policy led from the United States SEC, and the outcome is exactly what we're getting. But look, I feel very good about where we are. The judge clearly understands some of the nuances and how important this is. And I'm really pleased that this decision last week, I think transparency, it matters. And, we should expect the same kind of transparency from our government that we expect from our companies. I think we are apparently going to get that in a few weeks. So I'm pleased.
Oh, looking forward. Yeah, so waiting for a few weeks. I think I read before that Ripple spent $200 million so far on this court case. Yeah, so hopefully we see the resolution soon.
Look, I think it highlights one of the problems is it's very, very expensive to go to court with a counterpart against someone who has an unlimited budget, right? We're going against the U.S. government. And so, I think the SEC probably underestimated the opponent they were taking on, and our conviction and our resolve that the facts are on our side, the law is on our side. And as I've said very publicly, it's very clear to me that the history will be on our side. These are technologies and capabilities that are good for businesses, they're good for consumers, and I think they will transform how the financial system works, whether or not the SEC wants to declare them as security or not. I view these things as inevitable, which is also, that's a very exciting place to work and to be for Ripple, as we're leading many parts of that.
Yeah, curious, in terms of the countries that Ripple leaning into right now, given the US negative approach to crypto currently, what are the countries that you are quite active in? You just opened, I think, the office in Dubai.
That's right. We've actually been in Dubai for a few years, but we just expanded the office there. Dubai as a Middle Eastern hub. And again, to the point, your question, when you have a government who's doing the work to provide the clarity, then you have companies say, okay, I want to invest in that market. Because I know all of the entrepreneurs I know in the crypto space, and again, I'm sure many of them are on your panels and presenting here, they want to follow the rules, but they have to know what the rules are. And in some countries, and I talked earlier, the United Kingdom, the United Arab Emirates, the EU, Japan, Singapore, they have put time into passing comprehensive regulatory regimes and rule books, and having that licensing regime, having the licensing regime in place allows companies to know what licenses are needed and to make sure that the governments and the regulators have the visibility they want. And to be honest, if I were to go back and set up Ripple now, I would not set it up in the United States. And that's a sad thing to say. I'm a U.S. citizen. I spent most of my professional life in the United States. But if I were to go back and I could change that decision very early on, I would do that.
All right. I think our time is up. My last question to you, Brad. You have obviously been to several crypto cycle. Any advice to the audience and builder out there during crypto winter?
I appreciate you asking this. I have been through a bunch of cycles, and both personally and Ripple, we've seen a lot of ups and downs in various crypto, what I'll call crazes. And look, I think if you make a smart bet, you're patient, and you try not to get too far ahead of yourself, the opportunity is there. These are technologies that are not going to go away. And for Ripple, it really we focus on infrastructure because we understand what problem is there and what problem we can solve. And as long as you stay true to understanding who's your customer, what problem are you solving, and it's a problem that they value, I think there are going to be a lot of really amazing businesses built in this space. And as I said, I'm sure some of them are presenting here alongside me. I think chain analysis is a great business as well.
Right. Thank you so much, Brad, for being here with us today. Please come back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tai. It's great to see you.